around things happening on the internet and engaging Nigerians and Gambians and Ghanaians and everyone across Africa on issues concerning their internet rights. But the bigger part of this conversation is that the Internet Freedom Forum guarantees that beyond having conversations with the experts and the government actors, that we get action and that movement is made and there are tangible outcomes. So again, welcome to the Internet Freedom Forum 2018. Welcome from those who have traveled from far and wide to be part of this conversation. Without much further ado, there are a few things that we just quickly want to run through. For those who are using their headsets for translations, please, you will find English language on channel 1, and the French language will be on channel 2. So again, for those who are using headsets for the translation, English is on channel 1 and French is on channel 2. The hashtag, if you're tweeting about this and sharing the conversations happening here, is IFF 2018. We also have Wi-Fi available for you that is open for everyone to use. It is IFF 2018, so just search for it and you will be connected. Let me call on Dr. Ogundikwe now. She's a program director with Paradigm Initiative. She'll give us a few bits and pieces in the opening as we get set for our first panel. You can clap it aloud. Clapping is not forbidden in Nigeria. Welcome to Internet Freedom Forum 2018. I hope that you are as excited as I am, and my team is as well, to receive all of you. I've been speaking with people over the last 2 days as they arrive and sometimes en route, and it's been tedious to get here for most people. I understand that there's been a lot of sacrifice that some of us have had to make. And I know that people arrived into midnight even yesterday. I know people who arrived like 4 a.m. in the morning on Monday and they arrived into meetings. And I think that it speaks to the importance that we attach and the passion that we have to have these conversations, and not just for the sake of having them, but for the sake of highlighting what the next frontier will be for advancing digital rights in Africa. It is not my job to set the tone of conversation. The opening panel will do that, and they'll do really well. And this is not a keynote address as well. It is just to tell you how excited we are for this conference, to have you. One of the things that is very important for us in planning Internet Freedom Forum each year is to have really engaging conversations. And we do not only do that with the topics or the theme or the broad things that we consider. We have also done that with the quality of people that we brought together for this year's panel. So we had a difficult job this year. We had over 700 people indicate interest to be at the Internet Freedom Forum. We had a capacity for just about 300. It was worth, selecting candidates to be sponsored because we had so many fantastic applications and we only have so much. But we did our best to make sure that selections were widespread and that voices were represented from all key regions of Africa. And we hope that it is as engaging and as valuable for you as it will be for us. We will not be the only decision makers. It is not only Paradigm Initiative that will be looking forward to actionable outcomes from this engagement. We hope that in your space, as a policymaker or actor, as a journalist, or as an internet organization, whatever it is that informs your interest in these issues, you can connect with what you find to be valuable and build a will to take an action from there. So once again, welcome to Internet Freedom Forum 2018. A few housekeeping tips. You will find markers that are stuck on the floor in the shape of feet that lead to all the facilities that we will be using for this conference. I should mention to you that we are not the only ones here. There are other people who are also having meetings in this facility, but you will find Internet Freedom Forum, you'll find markers in the shape of feet just stuck along on the way to the restroom and the restaurant and the basement floor where the breakout sessions, some of the breakout sessions will be taking place. So if you will just follow that, I am sure that you will not miss your way, but if you need anything, you can speak to any of us to help you with that. We will be using meal tickets for lunch. So when it's time to have lunch, you can just come around to the registration desk to grab one. Otherwise, you miss out on the best jollof rice in the whole world. So, having said that, you know, the team and I, we're really committed to making sure that you have the best 2 days of your life. So, if you need anything, please do not hesitate to talk to us. Again, welcome to Nigeria. Welcome to Internet Freedom Forum 2018. Welcome to plenty of sunshine. Somebody said, yeah, no, I try to think about it as all year long summer. Yeah. And I think that's fun. Let's just have the most, let's just make the most use of the time and have those conversations that will move us forward, and we look forward to networking and collaboration and where this conversation leads us in terms of the work that we all are doing collectively and individually to advance public policy for internet freedom on the continent. Welcome. I am back, but not for another speech. We will have the opening panel. We are definitely not having a keynote because we decided that there are a number of people who could give keynotes, and when we had problem making a decision, we decided why not have all of them highlight the conversations that will be important to have in this conference. So I'll just bring up Wayne Gasherson. He's not the keynote speaker. It's just moderating the opening panel, or the keynote panel, if I could put it that way. So please welcome Wayne Gasherson with me.
Well, I heard Nena say we can manage him. If you agree, say yay.
Yes, I do.
If you disagree that you shouldn't just manage, say nay. The nays have it. All right, if I ever contest for elections in Nigeria or any other country, please don't vote for me. I'll make a very bad politician. So, we have the opening panel this morning. I want to quickly invite the panelists who will set the tone. The conversation this morning for the next 80 minutes is to set the tone for the conversation. We'll be looking at what is happening across the continent and what happened over. So, join me as I welcome the panelists for this morning. You can be sure it is not a panel. What do you call a panel with all women and a sprinkle of men? It's a panel, right? Okay, so let me call the only other man on this panel. Actually, I'm not on the panel, I'm moderating. The only man, Dr. Wakabi Waragala from Sipesa. You're going to drown in the sea of women, so find a good seat. All right, please make welcome, all the way from Internet Without Borders, Executive Director. She's smiling already, Julie Owono. Well, Jessica is on the same table, so please welcome Jessica Deary. Next. Okay. Teki Akweche Falconer is with the Data Protection Commission, where she's a director from Ghana. Please make her welcome. And we have one of our partners for this event, Titi Akinsomi, Head of Public Policy and Government Relations at Google. Please make her welcome. Okay, where you see this determines how far I have to walk. Oh, she's doing all the way. Okay, great. Thank you. So, the way this works is we're going to have a conversation.
Stay on there. Let me come there.
On
Stay on there.
What's hot in Africa today? What is that one thing, or what are those two things, or what are those three things, hopefully not four or five, things that you want everyone in Abuja at this venue talking about over the next 2 days and considering action on over the next year or so?
Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Private Relations, for getting me.
Yeah, you can, sorry, you can go close to the stage or whichever one you can take it from here.
I used to be the head of the Data Protection Commission in Ghana. I am no more. I'm currently a senior partner at a law firm called Nisian Pote & Co. But my area of specialization is in IT and telecom law. And I'm also a founder and a member of a not-for-profit think tank for Africa called Africa Digital Rights Hub, currently based in Ghana. So that is my brief intro about me. In terms of what is important as far as digital rights are concerned, of course my pet peeve is privacy and data protection issues. But apart from the fact that it is my pet peeve, I think it's a very, very important issue for consideration, looking at where the digital era is going and then some of the issues that are coming up. Apart from that, of course, issues of rights, access, and control to personal information, issues of access and control of digital information is also key for me. Freedom of information as far as the internet is concerned is also critical. Freedom of expression, access of rights, issues of censorship, and then more importantly, children's rights and online child protection.
Thank you. Okay, Jessica.
Okay. Hi. Thank you also. I'm so excited to be here. And thanks to Paradigm for getting me here as well. So I'm Jessica Deere. I'm the executive director of an organization that's kind of like Paradigm called SMEX. We're based in Beirut, Lebanon, and we consider ourselves both a Lebanese and a regional organization. And I'm hoping, I think that you invited me because we do cover a lot of North African countries in terms of digital rights, as well as other countries in the Middle East. We advocate also for an open, secure internet, and we do it primarily through research and knowledge and advocacy. And just to give you a sense a bit of the work that we do, we've recently done project mapping telecom companies across the Middle East and their public disclosures of terms of service and privacy policies. And I think this includes operators that also work in Africa, at Salat and MTN. We've also been mapping legal frameworks for online media in the Arab region, and we're hoping soon this year to be expanding that to Latin America, Africa, and Asia, some countries in Asia as well, and I'm happy to talk about that later. And later this year, we'll be doing an event like this, inspired in part by this and other internet freedom events, sort of a digital rights summit in the MENA region, which will include Arabic-speaking African countries. And possibly some non-Arabic-speaking African countries. So my list of pressing issues is about as long. And I'll try and maybe focus it a little bit. There are many, many issues that we're dealing with in the Middle East, and it's really hard to characterize them on a regional basis, especially if you're talking about Arabic-speaking African countries. Egypt is very different. What they're dealing with and facing is very different from what Tunisia is dealing with and facing. So, and I imagine I'll have some time to get into those specifics later. But I'll say from an organizational perspective, we had this conversation earlier this year. What are the pressing issues? Because we have so many. I mean, I can list a dozen different issues, from shutdowns, surveillance, privacy, censorship, false news, all of these laundry lists of issues that we're all contending with. As an organization, we have to manage our resources well. And what we decided this year as a team to focus on were internet shutdowns, specifically in in conflict environments, as well as internet shutdowns that have been used across the Arab region, like during exam time. So it's not maybe the most sort of sexy look at internet shutdowns, unfortunately, but I think it's what's happening, and we see it as you know, this idea of using the internet as a single point of control, and it's actually highlighting that there's actually a policy problem. And we're starting to sort of make those connections over and over again, that the internet is being used as a scapegoat for policy problems that haven't been dealt with at a deeper level. So the second issue that we're focusing on is the construction of mass surveillance states. Now that technologies of surveillance have become so much more affordable and accessible to governments like mine in Lebanon and across the region, we're seeing them deploy mass surveillance. Malware, for example, was recently discovered in Lebanon in a program that was called Dart Karakal, where they are actually installing malware on people's phones through phishing links to try and build some sort of a surveillance state. And we're seeing this across the region. Egypt saying that it wants to create its own Facebook, etc. And then the third sort of related issue to that is the data protection and privacy. We're seeing a lot of governments sort of starting to explore and adopt biometrics programs, but they don't have adequate data protection and privacy regimes in place. So there's these legal aspects of things. And I'll just go ahead and stop there because I think my 2 minutes are up.
All right, thank you. So, Julie.
Good morning, Benga. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Paradigm, for the invitation and for organizing this very important conference and meeting. So I'm Julie Owono, the Executive Director of Internet Sans Frontières. So there are some French speakers here. Internet Without Borders. So we are a non-profit. We are based in Paris, and I used to be the head of Africa Desk Paradigm Promotion. So I oversee the work of the organization worldwide, but we worked a lot on digital rights issues in Africa. And I would say that I introduced my speech, not speech, but my responses by saying that this conference is very important, and it's indeed very important. We've seen recently revelations surrounding Cambridge Analytica and broadly surrounding these Western companies which use continents and countries where the state of digital freedom, digital rights protection is not existent or very low, and they use these countries and continents as a testing ground for their surveillance products, for instance, or for their election meddling products. So obviously, the conversations we're going to have here are essential and probably will inspire, I hope, other solutions and to some of the challenges we're facing now and that the rest of the world is facing. So on the digital rights issues, which we think are pressing, obviously the issue of freedom of expression and network shutdowns in particular is quite growing on the continent. It's been 2 years now that the trend towards more internet shutdown has been constantly increasing. It's getting more and more sophisticated. In the beginning, some governments would shut down just like that or cut off a cable like we've seen in Cameroon, my country. But now they're becoming, as the advocacy and the work that we do, as much as it has worked, but it has also helped this government think more about how to strategically shut down the network without, targeting companies like we've seen in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was, what have you reminded, but I'm thinking of this country where the whole country was shut down except Addis, where the African Union is and where all these companies are. I'm thinking of another country which is not too far from here, Chad, which has been shutting down its social networks for almost a month now. So it's not the whole internet, it's only certain websites. So we are seeing a sort of sophistication in the censorship methodologies, and which demands an adaptation of our advocacy work. Related to censorship is also social media monitoring, as many states call it. We've seen that with the justification of fighting against fake news. More and more governments are, saying that they will monitor what's happening on social networks, like in Cote d'Ivoire, where now the judiciary is asked to, the judiciary actually summoned admins of Facebook that they have to tell them about on fake news, which is totally mind-boggling for us. But yes, this is one example. Or in Cameroon, where elections are coming, and obviously social networks will play a huge role. So yes, and I'm thinking also of Tanzania, where now to be a blogger you have to pay. Come on. Yes, they're very, very worrying trends in terms of freedom of expression and censorship. But another very important trend is privacy, and on that I totally agree with what has been said by my colleagues, and specifically the level of privacy protection that Africans are granted compared to other internet users in the world, and specifically Europeans or North Americans, which are nationals of companies which operate here in Africa. So I think that there is a lot of work to do to invite these companies to respect more, to be leaders, to take leadership in privacy protection, because obviously some governments don't do that and won't do it in the next few years. So obviously, corporate here have a responsibility, and we think it's another important issue to highlight, but I'm happy to discuss more.
Thank you. I know Wakabi will say privacy, I know Titi will say privacy, I know everyone will say privacy. Maybe not. Okay. Wakabi.
Hi, my name is Wakabi, and I work with CIPESA. CIPESA is based in Kampala, Uganda, and CIPESA stands for Collaboration with International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. We are mostly a research organization founded in 2004 in Cape Town, before we came to Makerere University in Uganda, and then eventually got out of the university to become a more independent entity. Our work is about mostly producing and making available information that informs different stakeholders on why we need progressive and inclusive ICT policies that support improved governance and poverty reduction. So we do research, we do capacity development, and we do a lot of convenings where different stakeholders talk about what is needed in order to leverage ICT to deliver what we care about, namely improved livelihoods, but also greater protections for rights. In the conversation here, I would like us to speak about a couple of things which my predecessors have hinted on. One of them is related to the issue which my immediate predecessor, Julia Wano, mentioned, namely the shifts in tactics by government in relation to shutdowns. Where they were blatant, the shutdowns are now being done in discrete ways, which might be more difficult for us to detect. I only use that as a hook to say that the predators of internet freedom on our fair continent are not resting on their laurels. They are increasingly coming up with new ways in which they can constrain what citizens may do or may not do, what they may say or not say on digital platforms. The advocacy has been fairly huge against internet shutdowns, and it is likely that we will not see a lot of shutdowns like we have seen, at least not in the form where they were so blatant as they have been in the past. We are still seeing shutdowns, of course. I think Chad, Sierra Leone, DRC, we have witnessed shutdowns. In Ethiopia, I was in Ethiopia 2 weeks ago. There was no, there has been a long-running shutdown in especially areas around Oromia, which the government has lifted. There's a new government in that country which is implementing reforms. But in fact, there are still shutdowns that are going on unreported. Some of them are deliberate, some of them might be because of the incompetences of the telecom provider. Away from that, however, is that because of this advocacy that we have seen around shutdowns, governments are coming up with other ways of controlling what citizens may say or may not. And I give the example of what's happening in East Africa, for instance, at the moment, where the Tanzania government has just last month come up with regulations for social media users and for bloggers and those who stream content, audio and video on TV, and those who run online forums. You have to register and provide all sorts of information and pay a hefty amount of money to get a license, which the regulator has the power to revoke in case you offend in their view. Uganda similarly has introduced content regulations on, I think, last month. It has also proposed a tax on the usage of social media to take effect if Parliament passes it on July 1st of this year. Kenya has had an attempt which has been litigated for the time being as of last week successfully by civil society groups to stop what could potentially be equipment that can enable surveillance being placed with the telecom service providers. Those changing tactics obviously tell us that as civil society we need to also be in equal measure monitoring what the governments are doing, documenting it, and coming up with strategies to mitigate what the governments are trying to do in terms of controlling what we're doing. I think there isn't sufficient actors in that regard, and that worries me. The second issue, which I'll talk about, obviously is related to that, is that issues of internet freedom, issues of cybersecurity, obviously are too complex and too important to be left in the hands of government alone. I think that is a paraphrase of a saying, I believe, by John F. Kennedy. Politics is too important and a subject to be left to politicians alone. Internet freedom, cybersecurity, data protection and privacy, these issues at the moment, governments and their friends in business are basically driving the agenda in terms of determining what the parameters are, what the priorities are, and in most cases, obviously, the interests of the citizens suffer. As civil society groups, I think we are challenged to up our game and do more, because the consequences of leaving these issues to government alone are not positive at all.
Thanks, Wakabi. I'll come back to a few of some of the issues that apparently you and Julie have definitely touched on. But let me come to you now, Titi. What are the issues you want to see people talk about over the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, and beyond that, you would like to see action on across the continent for the next year or so?
Thank you, Benga. Thank you for having me part. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be here at the forum. I'm going to be slightly unpredictable and not mention privacy. It is the obvious elephant in the room. I will also say something I believe I have always said at every single Internet Freedom Forum. Maybe slightly different in the way I phrase it, and it's this. To these Western companies, and the ones that reflect them locally, or that do similar businesses, the user is king. There's a favorite phrase I came across once I joined Google, and it's this: if you break the user's trust, it's completely bad for business. But what do I want the next few days to actually focus on? And I had to scramble because I left it in my bag to get one of the folks sitting in the room to help me bring this. I'm holding here a small booklet. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. The camera can take a look at it. This commemorates 30 years, but now it's 32 years. It's the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and of course the Rules of Procedure of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Sometimes we on the continent are so busy allowing our conversations to be directed by what happens everywhere else in the world. We forget to focus on what we need to focus on. So what would I like us to do in the next few days? To find time in the midst of the conversations around cybersecurity, privacy, to actually look to the African Union, to our African continent, to review what it says about rights. And let's see if it actually measures up to what we advocated for. Because at the end of the day, sincerely, you can tap onto the track of the conversations everywhere else globally. But if our laws and our legislations, the things that, the governments that are critical to ensuring this world works well, if what they're agreeing to does not sync with our conversation around digital rights and freedoms, then sincerely, we are just making noise in a really large way. So I would like us to focus on that and spend time on it. I have spent the last year, on a personal and a professional basis, reviewing the privacy regime on our continent, identifying places where I see its gaps, and also looking for opportunities to be able to conform, address, and engage. I'm not sure if I asked this last year, but it hasn't changed in numbers. How many African countries actually have a data protection agency or commission? Ghana for sure, and Ghana is a great standard. That's something I would like us to be able to engage with as well, beyond this countries. I'm also looking forward to being able to have conversations around the concerns that sit on people's minds. That's it. I'm going to keep it short. Very unusual for me, but I want the conversation to really happen.
Thank you. So, I've heard the phrase elephant in the room used, and I want to start with you, Teke. So you were head of a data privacy agency, yes, in Ghana, and this is recent events, Cambridge Analytica, and you're in Nigeria, where we're finding out that we're a test ground for the Cambridge Analytica's work around influencing and manipulating elections and things like that. There are Kenyans in the room where that also happened. And teacher asked a question about how many countries. Let me ask in this room, how many countries represented here actually have data privacy and protection laws? Not in that name exactly, but you get the idea. Data privacy and protection laws. How many countries in the room? Okay, Alberto, okay. No country?
There's 17.
So there are less than 17 countries across the continent, and I'm sure there are some of them in this room. Okay, Okay, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria is almost there, Senegal. Now, and I've asked this question to paint a clear picture. Now, these are countries where governments are registering mobile phones, registering SIM cards. For those of you who travel into Nigeria, if you picked up a mobile, a SIM card without registering, please talk to me after now so that you don't get into trouble. I'm just kidding. But seriously, in all of those countries, no data privacy laws, yet biometric data is being collected. In the country where you are right now, there are 6 different government agencies that collect biometric data. And in the next year or so, when the Population Commission is conducting the census again, we may have to do the same thing. Now, so, check it. Why is it that a continent that is, mostly young, mostly mobile, and is churning out data, yes, I know, no pressure, I can see the smile already. Why are we so distant from this obvious need? It's been proved that we're test grounds for various violations, yet 17 out of 54, 55 only have data privacy laws. That's if it's implemented. What's going on here?
This is a very difficult question for me. I'm going to be trying. I'll try and be diplomatic about my answer, but it's a leadership problem. It is a leadership problem. We have leaders, and unfortunately, permit me to reiterate, because recently Kofi Annan also mentioned, the kind of leaders that we have. Our leaders do not reflect majority of the citizens who are youth, who are more abreast with these technologies and the rest. And so just recently, I think it was last night, I heard that in the heat of the Cambridge Analytica issues, we have had policymakers say, we are investigating. And we clearly know that these policymakers do not even understand what this technology means. They don't appreciate the extent to which it goes. They don't know anything about it. So that is where the difficulty stems from. And if you want to stretch it, especially when you look at data protection and privacy, it's a highly specialized area. And in my own experience, even when you have forward-thinking policymakers that drive that agenda, and you have laws that are passed, Africa is still going through it. It's not just Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, all the agencies that we're having, regulators are having capacity issues because we do not have a knowledge base that understands these issues, that are able to drive it, and also civil society that should be pushing that agenda. We don't have the skill set to do that. So there are a number of challenges, which is why we are not seeing that. But I believe having these conversations, puts us in a better stead, and we will continue to work to bring about some change, though it will take time. I believe we're in the right direction.
Okay. When you said you were going to be diplomatic, I didn't know you would start by saying that, our leader, it's a leadership problem, because that obviously, it's not so diplomatic, but it's okay. Now, let me come to you, Jessica. So, Teki has made a point about, capacity issues, a leadership problem. What is your experience working in North African countries with privacy and this disconnect between the priority of policymakers and what should be citizen priority around privacy issues?
Well, again, I want to be careful because I don't work in a North African, Arabic-speaking country where I have familiarity with it, but I also don't want to speak on behalf. Also, they're very diverse. But I will say, with a particular North African, Arabic-speaking country in mind, that one of the phrases that I hear very often, and I think you can say this about a lot of and I think this is pervasive through everything that we do in digital rights. So at the same time, there are people within these governments who are very proactive, who are aligned in terms of values with a lot of the values that, I mean, they're maybe few and far between, but they do exist. So, I don't want to paint everything completely monolithical. But to the point of leadership and strengthening, there's a real lack of understanding and knowledge. It is a very specialized field, but there's also not a lot of requests for assistance or engagement. We're starting to see maybe a little bit more. For example, in Lebanon recently, through the mobile telecoms mapping exercise that we did, we learned that out of 66 mobile operators across the 22 Arab League countries, only 14 publicly disclosed their terms of service and only 7 publicly disclosed a privacy policy. When we started publishing or tweeting about this online, the CEO of one of the telecom companies in Lebanon said, because they were talking, I can't remember the context of the conversation, but said, can you come and help educate us on that? And I'm going to take a note from Julie, and I hope that I don't take something that you were going to say, but Julie said that one of the things that they did with some of their recent reports is actually deliver it to the telecom ministry. And so we're planning now to do that. So as a big point here, what I think we're starting to do is to try and find those people who are willing to listen and to strengthen their capacity to at least understand the issues by, first, we're trying to really refrain from a lot of naming and shaming at this point, because I think it's really counterproductive if somebody is just ignorant on an issue to kind of hold them responsible for that ignorance in a way that's embarrassing. If it's something that's more of a pretrial detention or something like that, I think we have a lot more ground to stand on. But when it is these technical issues, we're trying very much to educate, to interact, and to engage with government officials to strengthen their capacity. And at the same time, as an organization, we're trying to strengthen the capacity of journalists. As I think, I saw there was a workshop yesterday, digital rights reporting for journalists. We're trying to do the same thing by right now we're in the middle of producing a backgrounder on biometrics that will sort of frame the issue. What are biometrics? What countries are starting to deal with them? And actually saying, here, if you're a journalist covering digital rights issues and biometrics becomes an issue in your context, what are the questions you should be asking? What should you know about the legal framework? So we're trying to do this both at the policy level and also at the larger sort of mass media level.
Thank you. I think you touched on an important point that we saw in one of our own reports of that initiative last year. There is a connection between data privacy and network shutdowns. I mean, what we simply did was to map the countries that don't have data privacy laws and the countries that were shutting down the internet. And it was almost correlated. So I'll come to you now, Julie. You spent the last year worrying about who's shutting down, talking to governments about don't shut down and all that. And I know that, Jessica talked about how naming and shaming doesn't exactly work when you're trying to engage. But you've been doing a lot of naming and shaming, around internet shutdowns. What are you seeing? Is it working?
Yes, it has worked. I'll give an example. Earlier this year, Chad had already shut down telecommunications. It was supposed to last a bit long, but it lasted only a few hours. Why? Because the Keep It On coalition, which is the Keep It On fighting against shutdowns worldwide, which Internet Sans Frontières is member, SMEX is member, is member. As soon as we put out the release, the internet came back. So it means that at some point it is efficient, at least in the short term. But obviously naming and shaming is not strategic for the longer term. But it's important to do it because I have to slightly disagree because I don't think that governments don't know what's privacy and what's freedom of expression online. They do know because they buy equipment and services that infringe those rights. So they know the importance of those rights to some extent. And one thing on the issue of privacy, one thing that we're seeing that really worries us is the ability, the easy and the ability, the fact that it's very easy for some governments to get data from telco operators to send unsolicited SMSs to citizens, threatening them like we've seen in Cameroon in 2017, or strongly inviting them to go to vote like we've seen in Brazzaville, Congo-Brazzaville 2 years ago. So some governments really do know about privacy. It's just that, they are indeed advocates of privacy within those governments, but their voices are not they're not heard, unfortunately, for now. But the importance of naming and shaming is to show that they have, at least they can find people responding to those attacks. And I think that's important. Before even starting this conversation, you cannot start a conversation with someone who slaps you. There's no point. You have to, okay, no, don't slap back, but, no, not eye for an eye. But, okay, at least you have to show that you know your rights and you're ready to defend them. And then we can sit at a table. That's something that we also do at IFF. We can sit at a table and discuss with those governments. The thing is, we send them letters, but they never respond. So it's also difficult to have a dialogue with somebody who doesn't want to speak with you. But what I want to say is that it's important to show that you're conscious of, as citizens, we're conscious of our rights, and we're ready to defend them, either through legal lawsuits, either through advocacy, either any peaceful ways. But yes, we are always open to dialogue. Dialogue is the only way through which we can help solve some of the challenges that we're facing. But the thing is that our leaders need also to lend an ear to what we're saying, what we're asking for, and what we are proposing as citizens as well. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. So, Wakabi, you mentioned content regulation. I think, Julie also mentioned the fact, but is there anyone from Tanzania here in this room? I want to know if that person is a blogger and if you've paid your $800 already. $900. You could as well say we don't want bloggers, right? Now, Wakabi, we've seen this. This using legislation to kind of, ask you to shut up, literally. And we've also seen a kind of pushback where, some governments say things like, well, we do believe in digital rights, but what about digital responsibilities? And when they talk about digital responsibilities, what they simply mean is, can you, censor yourself and not say some of the things you say at times? What are your thoughts on this? And what are we not doing well? What can we do better in terms of pushing back in terms of this, content regulation attempts, or even in many cases, that already existed?
Thanks, Benga. I think what we can do better, or do first, is that when we see Tanzania making regressive regulations of social media, as people in Nigeria, we should not be quiet. As people in Uganda, we should not be quiet, because what is likely to happen is that other countries are going to have copycat regulations. If these ones have been passed, then another country will have similar regulations. We've seen it with many of the other laws related to ICTs, that many African countries basically copy and paste what the other country has done. And the same thing is likely to happen with the Ugandan social media tax. If Parliament passes it and it goes through on July 1st, 2018, that every person who is going to access WhatsApp and Facebook and any other OTT services pays a rate per day of usage, then most likely that is going to happen in other countries. So the very first thing we all need to do is to put our voices to those who are in those countries and wherever else that are speaking out against how these regulations impede affordability and access to the internet, and impede also citizens' free expression and access to information. Without any doubt, such regulations as Tanzania has passed would lead to self-censorship, because the regulator has the power to revoke your license if you break any of the rules that they have. Also, obviously, it will reduce the amount of local content that we have and the diversity of voices that we have from our countries represented online. Because how many bloggers are able to pay in a year $928? What is it that you're doing that is going to enable you to stay publishing? How many radio stations which already pay for their traditional licenses are going to be able to also pay for a license to stream content online? Very, very few. So the obvious intention is to curtail access to information, but also scare those who are critical of governments. Some of these regulations really would be difficult actually to implement, but governments are not stupid when they are pursuing foolish endeavors. They know that even if they are not able to effectively implement a regulation, it will have a nuisance value. It will scare people from speaking out because they know their license can be revoked, because in the case of Uganda, you also register all your shareholders and your hosts and so they know they can easily get you turned off. So we need to involve ourselves therefore both in advocacy but also in processes that lead up to the issuance or enactment of laws and regulations. I think many times we have the scope for doing so, but in many countries we don't take a deliberate effort to provide alternative opinions on what these regulations and laws should consist of, and pass on those positions to actors that are able to influence what eventually gets passed. Note that when we contribute, they always take our views. There's the case, obviously, which we talked about here of Tanzania. When they published the draft of those regulations in September last year, many society groups, including ours, did an analysis of that and did also a stakeholder engagements. Those regulations were not as regressive as they are now because, for instance, they did not have the aspect of applying for a license and paying for a license. That only came out in the final regulations that were passed, and we don't want to think that any of the people that provided input from business or private sector suggested that.
So I think the reality is, if you're not on the table, as we say, you're on the menu, right? You're right. There are times when you try to contribute and your contribution is not accepted. But I'm coming to you now, Titi. You work in public policy and government relations. Have you seen, situations where people are on the table? They may get kicked off once in a while, but they find their ways around influencing legislation, because one of the things you talked about is the policy environment. Because the reality is this: every government that shuts down the internet has some laws to support it. So, good example, in Gambia, there's a new president, there's a new regime, but guess what? The laws are still the same. So, have you seen examples where this works, and what can we do? Because we can't just keep reacting to these things. We also need to get proactive.
So I think there's your very last word, we cannot keep reacting, is why I indicated to you that where I would like us to focus is actually on what is currently on ground and needs updating, for us to be a bit more proactive in our approach and in our conversations. to these issues. Does it work? Yes. But I think like probably everybody in this room hopefully knows, public policy, changing legislation, or changing laws can be a thankless, many years in the making, principles bending, I don't want to say breaking, task. But the recourse to not be at the table should be the very, very, the world is at an end, the devil, as we know it with the horns, is showing up at the table. Recourse. Your ability to get into the conversation is already, sincerely, 50% to ensuring that your voice gets placed. As a business, do we consistently get the positions we want to have in any public policy process in? No, more often than not, actually it's not. One of the first few things that I learned and I've come to appreciate is the word consensus, building a consensus. It can be painful, and I agree and I believe that many in this room understand that there are many places where the concept of consensus, there's no negotiation around it. And one of that is child rights. We actually have a long protocol that speaks to child safety on the continent, but is sweetly silent when it comes to the digital space. Does it work? How can it work? Is knowing your business. I'm trying to make sure I don't use, polarizing words. Understanding the others who sit at the table and why they stand for what they stand for, or they are requesting for the positions they're requesting for. It does change the dial. One of the questions I asked myself in the past year is, it's not that it's not been raised. There's no new idea under the sun. It's just the way you represent it. Why is it that after how many years, technically if we look at it, the last non-independent state on the continent was South Africa. Why is it that since 94 we're still at a position? It's not the first time that some kind of biometrics has been gathered. Why is it that we're sitting with just 17 out of 55? So I took a step back and tried to understand what's the notion of privacy on the African continent. How do we approach privacy? I'm a storyteller. I believe very much in our culture. So I took a step back and I looked at my culture. I looked at my family and I tried to understand what was my parents, what was their approach to privacy? Think about your particular unit first. And then begin to extrapolate how that reflects in our society. We have always been a society that tends to put security over the notion of privacy. Yep. And we've taken that particular behavior and our leaders have translated it to a space where we have the notion of privacy as something that's within community. And Teki and I have had this conversation before. We don't necessarily sit completely in the same space, right? But it's actually what drives it. There are a lot more African nations that have amazingly painful and great, sometimes awful, cybersecurity or security laws. We are very quick to take it. But when it comes to the notion of privacy on our continent, does it trump security? More often than not, it's not the case. And that's not a conversation we're having. So if you want to understand how to be able to influence privacy, get more nations, and hopefully our president actually signs up the executive deal at this time, and get more nations actually having that conversation, which is even more critical at this point with the digital economy. We have to be able to rethink our approach to it. One of it is better understanding why government cares so much about security. Why do they use this power? Why do they take this and they hold strongly to it? And this is what matters the most. And how can we, and this is a conversation that civil society and business needs to be firmly at the center of. And when I say business, I say it as a collective, particularly within the digital space. Needs to be at the forefront to help understand how we can not lose our principles, but shift our approach and our narrative to these things. I am hesitant to say that there will always be 100% win, but we have to understand the incremental wins that will get us to our goal. And then I'll bring another elephant in the room onto the table. GDPR. There is a furor around GDPR. You know, the two big, data gathering, data collecting institutions, Google and Facebook, and a whole bunch of others. I mentioned Google and Facebook because they have the biggest presence on the continent, have clearly mapped out approaches to this European law that's coming out, May 25th. How many of our countries on the continent has even had a conversation? One, Mauritius. So Mauritius has what they call a replicating GDPR law. That's already in place. That says, all right, let the GDPR come, but it's going to be reciprocal. Do we understand what that means? And I understand that the Mauritian government is actively going to be pushing at the AU level that should be adopted. That GDPR, go for it, European Union. But then there are institutions that are instantly pulling and working to ensure that, they align. But are we really protected as Africans? As someone who leads public policy on continent for Google, it's the same way that I understand we're an institution working on a continent that doesn't have many data privacy laws, but we still have to be in compliance with the countries that we emerge from. It's the same level of concern that I approach it, that GDPR is coming. And then I wear my African hat and I'm like, well, I never remove it. Are we prepared for it? But we need to win. And to win, you need to sit at the table, yes, with your activism hat on, yes, with your hat on as government, but more importantly, understand where we need to be able to connect. And I think that is where we're not getting it right, where we're consistently seen as being on different sides of the argument. And it's not the case. This is about a prosperous continent, correct? A prosperous digital economy on the African continent. So how do we work better together?
Okay, you ended up with a question. Okay, I know there are people who have some thoughts on these issues, and I'm going to scan from my right to my, I can see the answer, right? From my right to my left. Where are the microphones? I'm sure the microphones will come to you. So, if there's anyone who's sitting directly behind this, I won't see you. Okay, so I see two hands already, and I think we'll start with, okay, you can start with Femi. Okay, I'll come to you. Okay, he's right there. I see 4 hands, and I'll stop at 4 for now. I'll move from, okay, I can see 2 hands from one person. All right, let's start with you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for my name is Femi, Longe with the Co-Creation of the System. My question is around a comment that was made around naming and shaming as a strategy. And I'm trying to understand what are the pros and cons of naming and shaming as a strategy for these things in this continent. Particularly borrowing from, and I know it's a weird group to borrow from, but to borrow from the NRA, the National Rifle Association's strategy. Yeah, I know. Hate or love them, but they're a very influential group in the US. And one of the things that they have is every public official has an NRA ranking. That's the level of propensity or how they tilt on gun laws. What stops us from having something similar in this continent? Ranking public officials on their propensity to suppress or support digital rights. and put that in the public domain and use that as leverage in getting them to pass the kind of policies that we want. I'm interested as someone that comes at things from product angle to understand what the views of the panelists are on this and on naming and shaming as a strategy.
All right. Thank you, Femi. Let's come this way and then we'll go back. All right, there's a mic with you, right? Please don't forget your name, your organization, and the comment or question.
My comment is more important than my name and my organization, so if you permit, I will say those last. I want to report towards something that happened in Cote d'Ivoire. There was a case somewhere called Mbayakoro. A little girl was captured, kidnapped, murdered, and her genitals were taken away for ritual sacrifice. There was an outlash by civilians against the military. You should have done something, you should have kept us secure and all of that. They went to the military barracks and actually set the place on fire. Did a lot of damage. Someone wrote to Facebook, I have one for myself, we captured the screen. That guy is in jail now for 1 year for calling for murder. Inciting people to murder is a crime, whether it is online or offline. It's in their hands to make justice and then in a wrong way. I want to come back to the use of digital platforms for criminal purposes. And I have not heard this here, because the post consultant, you need to help us to begin to educate people. Because everyone, when they say, oh, it was Facebook this time, is the use of digital platforms as a tool for criminal activities. Because this is where the multipliers, he could have taken the African drum and gone around and mobilized people. But the thing is, we are moving from one era of communication to another. And whether we are journalists or whether we are civil rights activists, we cannot deny the fact that there is a lot of lawlessness on government, which is huge. I haven't signed a functionary, what is functionary in English? A national, whatever, people who work for government, what do they call it? Public official. I haven't been a public official in my life, but I have worked with government. That word government is one of the most occupied services. So when you come and deal with Minister A, someone in Ministry A, government, it's not in the sense of digital justice, and someone in the Ministry of ICT is thinking differently. I think that we need to unpack that. I work for the World Wide Web Foundation. My name is Nina, and I come from the internet.
Okay. Do you have a mic?
And government declared a state of emergency, and part of the state of emergency is to control the internet and then to shut down the internet. And in most places, still the internet is not accessible. Particularly the Oromia region. Dr. Wakali, I think you mentioned the Oromia region, but now optimism and hopes are there. The new Prime Minister is lifting some of the, the internet shutdowns in some places, but still it's an issue. Concrete action they took, to curb, the government action. So what should be the role of African Union, or otherwise we shouldn't have African Union? What?
Any immediate thoughts by analysts and then.
Je viens du Tchad. J'aimerais parler du Tchad parce que tout à l'heure, la conférencière Julia, je crois, Julie, qui parlait du Tchad. Et on ne peut pas être plus roi que le roi lui-même. Je viens du Tchad, je sais ce qui se passe là-bas au Tchad. Et concernant la coupure de l'Internet. Depuis le 1er avril jusqu'aujourd'hui, au Tchad, l'Internet est au moins limité. l'accès à l'Internet est limité. Limité pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a d'abord Facebook qu'on n'a pas accès. Et quand on veut aller sur Facebook, il faut transiter par plusieurs applications VPN et autres avant d'accéder à Facebook. On n'a pas l'accès à WhatsApp. Il y a que les emails qu'on peut envoyer. La preuve en est que quand j'avais reçu l'invitation pour venir ici à Abuja, je ne pouvais pas lire le mail. Et j'avais des difficultés à répondre à tout cela. Et pourquoi le gouvernement tchadien limite l'accès à l'Internet? D'abord, pour deux raisons. La première raison, c'est que actuellement au Tchad, nous sommes en phase de transition, nous sommes en train de changer de république, la forme de l'État. Nous basculons vers la 4e république. Et la 4e république actuellement chez nous est contestée par l'opposition et par la société civile. Et même l'Église catholique a fait des déclarations récemment pour s'opposer à cela. Parce que les gens ont estimé que ce qui se passe actuellement au Tchad n'est pas de la vie du peuple. En 2016, quand on organisait les élections présidentielles, l'Internet a été coupé. Parce que les jeunes au Tchad sont très actifs sur les réseaux sociaux et utilisent l'Internet. Alors, pour ne pas qu'il y ait de bruit sur les élections, le gouvernement a coupé l'Internet. En mars 2016, il y avait eu le viol de la lycéenne Zoura. Ça fait de tapage sur l'Internet. Une jeune lycéenne qui a été violée par 7 jeunes, enlevée, kidnappée, elle a été violée, on l'a filmée nue et on a publié les photos sur Internet. On a publié les photos sur Facebook. Ça fait de toller, les gens ont marché, ont manifesté pour cela. Et le gouvernement a décidé de limiter l'accès à l'Internet parce qu'il estime que ça crée de la haine et ça risquerait de créer des troubles à l'ordre public. Donc, le gouvernement limite considérablement l'accès à l'Internet au Tchad pour des raisons de sécurité et c'est purement politique. C'est politique. Aussi, il y a l'affaire, deuxième raison, c'est la sécurité. On a estimé que sur le lac Tchad, la région du lac Tchad, il y a l'infiltration des extrémistes et des terroristes et qui font des recrutements par l'Internet. Alors, ils font de leur propagande, ils publient des vidéos et autres via l'Internet et les jeunes de cette région-là, qui sont frontalières avec le Nigeria, vont sur l'Internet et découvrent ces propagandes et ça radicalise la jeunesse tchadienne. Donc, pour limiter la radicalisation et l'extrémisme au sein de la jeunesse tchadienne, le gouvernement décide aussi de limiter l'accès à l'Internet. Donc, quand Julie a dit que début de l'année, il y a eu une coupure d'1 heure, non, ce n'est pas seulement 1 heure. Actuellement, au Tchad, vous ne pouvez pas avoir accès au Facebook. Non, il n'y a pas accès. Je ne peux pas. Il fallait transiter par plusieurs applications pour avoir accès au Facebook. C'est limité, mais on laisse juste les mails, Google, on peut juste consulter cela. Même c'est limité considérablement. Juste actuellement, si vous partez au Tchad, vous allez constater que certaines WhatsApp, Facebook et autres sont limités. Twitter, c'est limité. On ne peut pas y avoir accès. Maintenant, par rapport au Facebook, il y a une mauvaise utilisation de Facebook, surtout par la jeunesse tchadienne. Il y en a qui utilisent cela pour un règlement de compte qui s'insulte, pour la division et autres, et qui crée de la haine. Donc, pour cela, le gouvernement est obligé de prendre des mesures, parce qu'on ne peut pas laisser la jeunesse comme ça utiliser Facebook et WhatsApp à des fins qui vont déstabiliser le pays. C'est ce qui amène aussi le gouvernement à limiter l'affaire. Je vous remercie.
If there are no immediate reactions, I'm sure Julie has a reaction to Chad. And also, so if we have some of those quick comments, so we can start with you, Julie, and someone else, and I'll take the last one.
Thank you very much for all the questions, and indeed, I totally agree with what you said on the African Union. Being, we barely have heard of the organization on the issue of internet shutdowns, despite the existence of a resolution condemning internet shutdowns. So it is indeed a work for the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression to take on and be more proactive on this very specific issue. Now, back on Chad, yes, we are totally aware of that. We have a team in Chad, and I'm happy to put you in touch. We have a team in Chad which has helped us at Internet Sans Frontières document all these freedom of expression violations. And I would like to inform here that one way to, it was asked about the strategy of naming and shaming. It is strategy for the beginning. We have no other means to call attention. If we hadn't named and shamed last year, maybe many governments would have continued shutting down savagely the internet like it used to be the case 1 or 2 years ago. So it is indeed a strategy as a beginning, but it's not a long-term strategy. Another way to have this internet shutdown issue to be solved is to use judiciary platforms and international judiciary platforms or organizations such as the UN Human Rights Council, which holds human rights periodic review of governments, which are members of the organization, of the UN. So we recently submitted a report on Chad, which is to be reviewed for its human rights review by the UN in November this year, and we submitted a report in which we indeed refer to all these human rights violations which you've mentioned and which we are indeed aware of. And I'm taking this platform to invite more civil societies to submit whenever it is possible for the states that they're working in, to submit reports to international organizations, because that's another platform for diplomatic work to be undertaken. So yes, thank you for decisions on track.
Okay, so Titi, and then I see Wakabi wants to push the button.
Julie, I wish you would actually also then share and maybe just give a hint of those diplomatic parts. They work, but they take time. So giving a sense of how much time it takes. I'm sure you submitted your report sometime late last year, early this year. A month ago, so in the first quarter of the year, but the review actually comes out in November. So sometimes the tactics, like I mentioned earlier, looks like it takes a long process, but they're actually more significantly effective. The AU, are they being as responsive as they could be? It's an older institution that has many parts that address sometimes the same issues. It's your ability to understand the path to actually raise your issues that it matters. So the report that you submitted, for example, to the UNHCR, I would expect also it's been submitted to the AU Commission on Human and People's Rights. Because what you there do is they're aware of the existing environment and don't just encounter it when they get to the UN, which raises their hackles. Again, it's understanding the dynamics, human behavior, and being able to engage with them. The other thing I wanted to be able to mention that Nina had actually inferred earlier, we mustn't underestimate the amount of education that still needs to be done on what we are all passionate about and sitting in this room on, which is how the digital world works. We get it, we think, and I say that inclusive of Google, but actually the level to which we get it, the majority of the rest of the world don't. And that's a lot of what we face. That people are not aware that in as much as these platforms are available, yes, you do a search, but you're ultimately responsible for the choices that you make based on that choice, on the search, right? You post things on various social media platforms, but you're ultimately responsible for the voice and the right to freely express yourself that you make use of. I think those are things that are key. Your ability to be able to engage on the local level is very much dependent on your willingness to listen and engage a bit more. And I think maybe that's another gap. There was a suggestion on, I absolutely love that. But this is my one advice. Don't call it naming and shaming, because you're already polarizing. Call it calling out. Do a call out. So think around the transparency reports that a number of technology companies do. It is technically naming and shaming, but it's not. And it does make a difference. And it will still be as effective in as much as you're calling out those who are consistently demonstrating a lack of regard for basic human rights, that you are also enumerating those who are changing their behavior in a similar way. Then it's constructive.
To be fair, I was the one who said naming and shaming. Most people talk about engagement. So Wakabi, you wanted to push the button. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually in response to what Melap raised. I think there are positive vibes coming out of Ethiopia, which for years has been, I think, the king of internet freedom predators in Africa. They were pioneers, they still are leaders, but there's a lot of positive vibe that is coming out of there at the moment because of the new government led by the new Prime Minister. They have nominal at least lifted the very long-running shutdown in parts of the country. But obviously we can't expect that this will be the last of the shutdowns in Ethiopia, because with the monopoly which the Ethio Telecom has on internet service provision, but also the fact that the internet has forever been part of the authoritarian control on power, we can't expect that overnight these troubles are going to come to an end. The pity, which I think also Melako mentioned, is that the African Union, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, as my addition, they are based in Addis Ababa, and when there is a shutdown in Addis Ababa, they are affected. They actually don't have alternative means of access to the internet. They could do more, and as civil society, as business, we can make them see what more they could do. Working through the mechanisms which have been mentioned, for instance, making shadow reports to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, is on the state of digital rights in African countries, is one mechanism which can be used, and which some of us have started doing. But there is also a lot of need to make noise around those reports. Once we write them, let's have convenings, let's have advocacy and awareness raising around them. The African Union also, with its very many bureaucratic issues and also interests, I think is in recent years making some positive moves towards supporting digital rights. 2014, there is a Nation on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, which was passed. Unfortunately, only I think 12 countries have signed it, and only 2 have ratified it. 15 are needed to ratify it before it actually comes in force. So there is a problem there. We need to make advocacy. Once the convention is actually in force, we can also use that as an advocacy tool. I am also aware that the Commission, the AEO, is developing guidelines on privacy and personal data protection, which will be ready next week. So again, this can be used in order to drive advocacy at national level, but also to engage the Commission to do more in terms of supporting the digital rights agenda.
Thank you. I'll take the last 2 comments, and I saw those 2 hands go up. They're right here. I hope I didn't miss any. Okay, you know what? If you don't mind, can we split the time for the 2 questions or comments amongst the 4 people? Does that work? So I saw at first, and
particularly in countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Rwanda, where they acknowledge the role of the internet in growing the economy, but at the same time, they are afraid of what the internet can do in terms of change. So there is a paradox, I think, of the internet freedom agenda on the one hand, and the argument on digital economy. I think what Paddy spoke about the conundrum. I don't really think it's easy to reconcile those two arguments. An open internet for freedom of expression and association, and on the one hand, and the digital economy argument. Because we also believe in internet growing in growing economies, but we also want the government to respect fundamental freedom. So how do we address that authoritarian dilemma? Thank you.
Yeah, the Internet Governance Forum part of the Internet movement. My question goes to Madam Titi, and my concern is about the level of awareness the African Union is doing towards promoting the protocol that you showed us. I mean, I'm from the backdrop of the working with the African Union before. A lot of these literatures just being packaged nicely, you said 32 years ago, but I'm concerned that how many of us in here and out there that are concerned about this document lying down, and how much has it been popularized to be used as a tool for protection in Africa? And then my next concern is about the level of empowerment from the two data concerned agencies, Google and Facebook, towards creating awareness after empowering people in Africa, basically towards data protection issues and how can we handle the protection of data in these countries. Are they just trying to make us understand that they are collecting our data, and are they helping us towards giving us knowledge about our rights on our digital protection in our countries?
Okay, thank you. So we've got two people on that table. We've got Iwe. Please go ahead, and then from there we'll come to you. I think that would be thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kodura from Zimbabwe. My question is to all the panelists. I think that there have been quite a number of initiatives to increase, just an appreciation of the principles around good internet governance, the African internet governance schools, the regional, the national ones, the training and capacity building that we've been receiving. What would you say is actually the major barrier in actually having, especially governance, because I think even in the schools and in most of these dialogues, we do have government represented. So what would you say is the barrier? Then the second question is around advocacy.
I was about to thank you for keeping it short.
Okay. So, two questions, very short. The second one is on advocacy. So there's been a declaration, at the last African Internet Governance Forum, the Declaration on Internet Governance. Do you think that it actually gives us opportunities? Does it offer an opportunity for us to actually begin to engage at a level which governments have actually made a commitment?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paul from Uganda. I want to talk about self-censorship. Oftentimes, I have one-on-one conversations with online users, and they will tell you they want justice online, they want to speak out, they want to open up. But online, they don't. Why? They're afraid of government, they're afraid of imprisonment, and I would like to know, how are we going to address the question of self-censorship? Yes, one would say we need to educate these people. Yes, how are we going to do that?
Thank you. That thank you wasn't censorship, that was really thank you.
Hello, I have a short question for Julie Owono from Cameroon. Julie, I want to ask you, given that we are soon going to face the political, let me say, elections in Cameroon, I want to know what steps you are taking to protect the rights of the internet advocates in Cameroon. And also, looking at the issue of fake news, what are you doing to moderate that on social media in our country? Thank you.
Wow, President Julie. All right, okay. Last.
Okay. Locally, we started this complete management. The question I want to ask is in respect of the legislation. Somebody mentioned that some of the policy formulators are not educated on the digital rights protection and privacy. What do you intend to do so that you can educate these policy makers on the importance of these digital rights? And then, yeah, to educate, to be able to educate them, because some of them are not aware.
All right, thank you very much.
And
so I've been told that we have, well, this is question, any question you want to respond to, just respond to them very quickly, and by the time you get here, I'll say thank you, and then we'll.
Okay. To comment on how to manage the seeming long distance between parity for government, security issues, and interference. It's continuous negotiation. There are nations that are sitting in much better space than we are in terms of respect of human rights, online and offline, and the opportunity that the digital economy presents. So we should learn from them, for sure, but we should learn to adapt. How to manage the knowledge of AU, how people are aware. It's again when you have the opportunity to share the information. I've shed light on a couple of things that have emerged and how people can engage with the AU. It is a huge organization, it's onerous, but you know what your expertise is, so find where your counterpart for that expertise is, and don't underestimate the power of being able to connect to it. At the beginning of this year, the sitting of the presidents of the AU actually signed off on the internet rights and freedoms. That already gives you quite a bit of power to present. The presidents of each country signed off on every single African country. That's a pathway for you. There is something that's coming up, and I think this emerged, and potentially also the question to you. The African Union's Commission on Human and People's Rights is actually coming up with a directive on elections that has a significant section on technology. If you don't know about it, now you know, connect with it, because that gives you another layer of protection of reference if there's any attempt to actually infringe, but hopefully that's not the case.
All right, thank you. Wakabi.
Thank you. What are the issues that need to be prioritized? I think at the moment, the governments are really determining what the priority issues are. And my response is directly to Arthur Bobo's question. The issues which governments are determining to be the priorities really need to not be the prism of governments by themselves determined. The current prioritization of security or using the internet as a development tool in ways that are determined only by the government, I think we need to provide inputs in determining this. Again, looking at Ethiopia, because it has been the most country with a deterministic view of what the internet should do, not rights but development. But even if Ethiopia tomorrow decided to be the most liberal about how people use the internet, because of the systemic effects of the monopoly and the shutdowns over the years, it will take a very long period of time for Ethiopian internet to be affordable and to be accessible and to meaningfully contribute to the development of the country. My last word concerns, I think, many of the issues that have been said here. We need to make very minimal actors care about digital rights. And digital rights should be defined very clearly to include access to the internet as a right to livelihoods. Not just your right to be able to speak, but show clearly that without access to the internet that is available and affordable, people will not be able to earn incomes, people will not be able to improve their livelihoods. That way, I think we will be able to recast many of the issues that we have in the digital world and make them resonate with various other stakeholders who currently may not be on the same table with us to promote internet freedom.
Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. I'll answer directly to Sophie's question, and I take this opportunity to thank Sophie for the great work she's doing in Cameroon. She's working at the intersection of gender and internet access and internet rights, and you should definitely speak to her in the next few days. But concerning Cameroon, obviously we'll rely on people like you, Sophie, and of course what we're trying to do, we are aware of the fake news and the hate speech issues in Cameroon, which are very real, and which have spiked since what we call now the Anglophone crisis. So we are deeply aware of this, and we are working with partners, including Paradigm, Access Now, and others, to foster a dialogue on this issue, on how to avert the spread of fake news, which will, in order to avoid that, fake news serve in turn as a justification to shut down the internet. So it's a very, we're very concerned by this country, and we'll focus many of our efforts in this region and country in the next few months.
Thank you. Jessica and Jenny.
Sure. I'd like to try to give an idea about what is it that governments can be doing, or people who are working in government. I think that was one of the questions. I think, from my perspective, one of the things that governments don't do at all is they never say that they rarely say they don't understand about digital rights, or they rarely ask for advice or engagement. So be transparent about what you know and what you don't know. Be transparent about what you're learning and how you're engaging on digital rights issues. I think there are some exceptions. I think Tunisia is a good exception of where a government has really tried to engage in digital space, encoding access to the internet and other things in their new constitution. But I think by and large in North Africa and in my region, this is something that there's not a conversation that's going on, which is why we are trying to not take, at this moment, the naming and shaming approach, and trying to engage to see exactly what is, how far can we push in that direction. I'm certainly not ruling it out. And the other thing I would just like to say, it's sort of an amalgam of things that I've been hearing and thinking from Nena's question and others, and also from learning about the experience with the Nigerian law that we hope will all be approved or assented to very soon, is that I think sometimes, especially when we're talking about these platforms being used for criminality, security versus freedom of expression or privacy sorts of conversations, that we tend to look for kind of a silver bullet. What's the one answer that we need to find? I know I feel this as someone who's sort of working in the digital rights space. And it kind of relates to the government question as well. I think the one thing that I think this bill, this idea of protecting human rights on the internet as the first step of guaranteeing that there is space for digital rights as the foundation of whatever happens in any government or any country is essential to understanding that there is a commitment there that, yes, on a broad level, we agree that there are human rights that should be exercised on the internet. And then we can look at things like, where is the point of amplification? Where is it that on a specific platform a horrible message is being amplified? And we can be very narrow and deliberate about how we start, or how the internet becomes regulated. I think we're at a point where everybody realizes that there will be some form of regulation, but what we want are good, informed regulations that feel like a club sort of beating us over the head.
Thank you. I just want to end on a note that we all have a critical role to play engaging with policymakers and everybody around, all the stakeholders around the table. I think the key to engaging with especially the policymakers, and in this case governments and other groups, is we have to be proactive. We have to be relevant. We have to be proactive in getting ahead of the issues, because this is a very dynamic area where the issues keep changing, and so our proactivity is actually going to help and also guide the direction of the conversation. We need to also be relevant in terms of understanding what the real concerns of the policymakers or governments are, because some of those concerns are relevant. And a lot of the time as civil society, we sometimes come across as, pushing for one side against the other, and that should not be the case. So in as much as these digital tools are there to enhance that, there are important things in them that are also relevant to the policymakers, and they are equally relevant to us as civil society groups and organizations and the rest. So where can we bring all these issues together at the table? And I believe it's a good starting point, to talk about the relevance, how it's going to help our economies, how it's going to build capacity in our own countries and the rest, because the policymakers want to see that. And then we also look at the bad sides of it, because of course there are real issues with regard to security, with regards to terrorism. There are real issues on inciting or using these platforms for criminal purposes. And so we should not shy away from those issues, because when we go to the table with a one-sided issue, it almost looks as if we don't want to talk about the other side, and nobody listens to us. So that's what I would end on. We have to be proactive and relevant and engage with them.
Thank you, Teki. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Akari. Thank you, Titi. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to thank you, Benga. Yes. We look forward to the other conversations that follow, and I can't wait to see the conversations on the side that follow, because we can't take all of the questions and comments. Thank you so much.